guys, this is the next video in my absolute beginner's guide to Kerbal Space Program. This actually might be one of the last videos because once you know this part, you're more or less not a absolute beginner at Kerbal Space Program anymore. This one's going to be on Hohmann transfer orbits, which is one of the simplest and most energy efficient ways of getting from one orbit into another orbit. So I'm just going to really quickly construct a basic spacecraft. I'm going to illustrate this by getting to the moon. So I'm gonna pop on, I'm not gonna be coming back, so I'm gonna pop on a actually, you know what, I don't even need that because I'm not coming back. So I am gonna pop on a fuel tank, maybe some, whoops, actually lander legs. Where are they? They're there. Alright, so I'm gonna pop on a fuel tank, some lander legs, a tiny little engine, and then a stack separator, and then we will pop on, let's see, adapter, and like I said in the asparagus staging tutorial, this is gonna be my base heavy lifter. Let's raise it up a little bit though. My base heavy lifter, 3 of those half fuel tanks. I really don't like using the red ones. The red tank heat issues kind of just completely turn me away from them. I'd rather just use 2 of the half size ones. Mainsail engine there. We're gonna set up some quick asparagus staging. Pop those on the outside. Use 3. See, this kind of got a little bit wonky in the latest update. Will that work? Why? See, that's so wonky now. I don't even know. It won't let me attach that. Will not let me attach that to the decoupler. I think somebody said you have to place them in a valid location, take them off, and then try to replace them. There we go. Alright, that fixes it. So yeah, that's the fix, I guess. You gotta put them on a valid location, actually attach them to a valid location, and then unattach them and place them where you want them, and they will all of a sudden just work. Okay, so we're gonna transfer there. I'm really sloppy with my fuel lines when I'm doing asparagus staging, but it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. To the 3rd, to the 4th. Whoops. Yeah, I hate when that happens. Okay, to the 4th. All right, so that's all set up. Yes. Okay. And then I need 2 stages. And it should be top middle, but let's just make sure. Top. This one. Whoops. This one. Middle. Yeah. I'm gonna be bad here and just assume this one's top middle. Don't try this at home. Always check your asparagus staging. Okay, so that's all set. Actually, you know what I want to add is an ASS because it's pretty essential. I cannot keep rockets straight. I just cannot. I'm incapable. I will just tip them over. Can I stick something to the top to make this semi-interesting? Put that on the top. Yes. We're not gonna dock it, but alright, there we go. Launch. Okay, now we're going to relaunch. There we go. Okay. It's wiggling quite badly, but we don't care. It'll stay together. It's the KST way. If it didn't, it would just add more struts. More struts, more boosters. Will always fix every problem. It's like duct tape and WD-40. So we've already showed you this entire part. This is just going to be getting up into a 100-kilometer parking orbit. So let's fast forward. Okay, so now we are in about 100 kilometer parking orbit. The eccentricity, as long as you've got it pretty circular, does not really matter. I've got about 103 and then about 100 there. So that's pretty circular. You can see you can't really even tell that that's elliptical. Um, so what we are going to do, in this case, we are going to, my rocket's kind of drifting there, but we are going to accelerate. This is just to get to the moon, by the way. You want to get into 100 kilometer parking orbit if you're going to a planet, but you don't do this next part unless you're just going to the moon. This is just a kind of rule of thumb to get to the moon. You can see the moon's directly behind us there, so we kind of want to pop all the way around the planet. I should have chosen a 120 kilometer parking orbit, but it doesn't really matter. I can fast forward this. Alright, so we are about to come around, and the moon is about to be on. You can kind of see it through the planet there. The moon is going to be on the horizon in a little bit. That's when we're going to want to make our burn, actually. So if we kind of approximate that on our actual orbit using a maneuver node, let's say right about here. It's going to be right about there that the moon pops over the horizon. Yeah, I would say about there. Okay. So watch what happens if we do a prograde burn right about there. It's gonna intersect the moon. So that'll pop up when you are about to intersect. I really haven't gone over this so far. When you're about to intersect another body. So you can see that our periapsis, if we do a burn there, is going to be 198,000 meters from the moon. So we'll leave it there. That's fine. You can see what our orbit's going to be if we actually kind of slingshot around the moon. It's just going to be a really big elliptical orbit around the planet. So we'll switch here. We will fast forward a little bit to get to that burn. I need to give myself a little bit of time to change my heading because it's completely off. Hopefully that's enough time. It's going to be in this direction. I'm going to give myself about 8 seconds before the node so that it's kind of straddles the node. That sounds dirty, but it's not. It's just, it's rocket science, okay? It's rocket science. It's going to be about the horizon, so I got to go up. It's going to be a... Come on. It's not turning left. I really should have put RCS on this, but... Oh, I'm going to miss it. It doesn't really matter if I miss it, because I really just approximately, you can see the moon's coming over the horizon there. You just want it to be about over the horizon. And I'm turning the wrong way. It would have been quicker to go the other way. Don't botch your burns like this. Don't do this at home either. But we are about there, so I'm going to try to start slowing down my turn. There's the blue. I want to burn towards the blue. The maneuver node will adjust. If you overshoot the maneuver node, it will adjust its suggested heading so that you actually end up with the orbit that you wanted. But I'm just looking for approximate here. So, moon's about over the horizon. We're going to lock on to that location, and we're going to do a burn. And we're about halfway right now. I'm going to start to throttle down a little bit so it's a little bit more controllable. And you can see it's kind of drifting off, so we want to keep burning towards it. And press X to cut the engine. And let's look at our actual orbit. We are going to encounter the moon, but crash into it. So we're going to want to adjust that mid-course. It's bad to crash into the moon. I just want to, if you have to be told that, you should maybe pick up another game at this point. So what I'm gonna do, I don't think that prograde is gonna help me. It kind of does, not really though. I think that I might want to do a radial burn. Yes, maybe, no. That's not good. Maybe inward radial burn. Not really. Do I maybe want to do a retrograde burn? Is that... Yep, that's why. I was kind of not thinking about that intuitively. Okay. So now I've actually got a periapsis, which means I'm going to miss the planet, which I kind of want to do. Okay. So we'll do that mid-course correction there. So this is a Hohmann transfer orbit. While we're waiting, this is a Hohmann transfer orbit. We're in a circular orbit around the planet Kerbin. We're trying to transfer into a circular orbit, another circular orbit around the planet Kerbin, which happens to be the orbit of the moon. So we do a little, this is actually, it's kind of a little bit difficult to tell because it's such an elongated ellipse, but that's an ellipse, that's half of an ellipse there. If that was more exact, which we kind of don't want it to be actually, but if that was more exact, that would be an ellipse where this upper part was tangential to the moon's orbit, and the bottom part was tangential to that 100-kilometer orbit that we were in. So the parking orbit is your initial orbit. That's going to be if you're going from Kerbin. You can be higher or lower. You obviously want it to be above 70,000 meters because that's above the atmosphere. But the lower it is, the faster you're going to be going when you do your burn. So the more the Oberth effect is going to take place. Without going into details, the Oberth effect basically means that the faster you're going when you do a burn, the more fuel efficient your orbit, or the more fuel efficient your burn is. So I found 100-kilometer parking orbit is pretty good. If you want to be able to fast forward a little bit faster, you want to have it above 120,000 meters. But it's really kind of arbitrary. You just want to be in a parking orbit so that you have the ability to get out of that parking orbit from where you want to get out of that parking orbit. Now, I mentioned that the moon coming over the horizon was a rule of thumb. That's because when the moon is over the horizon, it happens to be the correct ejection point from that parking orbit, which means that if you do a burn there, your orbit is going to end up extending along like it did here, and intersecting the moon. That has to do with the fact that the time that it takes for your spacecraft to go in the position that it's in that parking orbit, to the position that it's going to be in the target orbit, is going to be the same amount of time that it takes for the moon to get to that pretty much that same position in the target orbit. And that's really good because then you'll get an encounter. You'll go into the moon's sphere of influence, which you can see is right about this distance. Each body in KSP has a sphere of influence, which is the distance that you are from that body when you start to be affected by its gravity. Because in real life, obviously, we're affected by the gravity of every atom in the entire universe at the same time, but that's hard to solve mathematically. That's that's an unsolvable problem, actually, more or less, mathematically. So KSP uses a nice little mathematical trick called patched conics, which is simulating real life by only having you encounter one set of gravity at the same time. So obviously when you start off, you're in Kerbin's gravitational well more than anything else. So you're going to be affected by Kerbin more than anything else. So that's the only thing that they simulate. There's no moon. There's no like in real life. There's it's called a Lagrangian points between the Earth and the Moon. There's actually several. There's several where you're basically affected by each body's gravity exactly the same amount, and you more or less don't move. It's a single point, so you're going to move a little bit, but it's the point where the gravity is more or less neutralizes. So there's nothing like that in KSP, because if you go to, let's say, the 3/4 of the way point between the Earth and the Mun, you're still under the, or rather, Kerbin and the Mun, you're still under Kerbin's gravitational influence. You're still in its sphere of influence, and you won't get out of it until you're actually very close to the Mun. I hope that was a pretty good description of what happens, but that's how it works. So you can see that if KSP calculates that we're going to pass into a body's sphere of influence, then it'll show that you're having an encounter. So we're going to have a Mun encounter in about 5 hours, 13 minutes, 50 seconds, or a little bit shorter if we do this correction burn. So we're going to fast forward to the correction burn. Cannot talk today. And we're going to do that correction burn because we don't want to smash into the mun. I know Jeb would probably love it, but we don't want it. We want to show you the next step. You can't see the next step if we crash. 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, 20 seconds. Alright, so actually we're a lot closer to the target this time. Again, you wanna if you're setting up pretty precise maneuver nodes, you really do wanna get as close to them as possible. I'm just setting up really rough maneuver nodes along my orbit so that it performs more or less what I wanted. You can see that I missed the maneuver node and I actually got pretty close to doing the correct burn, and yet I ended up smashing into the planet as my projected orbit instead of having the correct orbit. Or, you know, I ended up smashing into it instead of having that nice little 100-kilometer periapsis where it would have been more or less perfect. Alright, so that's good enough, I think. 0.1 meters off. You can see our actual orbit more or less coincides with what it projected. So we're going to have a periapsis of about 280,000 meters. Let's fast forward to that point, and you'll see that our frame of reference in this map view kind of switches when we hit this this sphere of influence change at the moon encounter. So you'll see that coming up. It's kind of jarring a little bit. There we go. See? So now you can see that our inclination's pretty good because the moon is on the same inclination, as it has a 0-degree inclination with the plane of the orbit of Kerbal. That's different with the Mun, which you can see, or with Minmus, which you can see is inclined. It's a little bit more difficult in that way to get to Minmus. But you would just have to do a positive or negative anti-normal or normal burn to switch your inclination at the what is it called? My mind is drawing a blank right now. I see this like every day in KSP. Actually, I can bring it up if I target this. Why did it untarget it? No, it won't target it. That's weird. That's possibly another 18.4 glitch there. Well, let me target Mimus. Yeah. Descending node and ascending node. There we go. So that's more or less the point where the planes of your orbits cross, and that's where you want to do your inclination change burns. So if I waited until I got to this point, I would obviously have escaped the moon, but if I waited until I got to this point and then I burned upwards, if you can see where my mouse is going, that's upwards, it would adjust my orbit so that it was more in line with the moon. But we're not going, or more in line with Minmus. I keep switching the names. So let's untarget Minmus here. Alright, so we are not going to hit the moon, which we don't really want to do. We want to get in orbit around the moon. The way to do that, if you remember back to my orbital mechanics video, is basically our apoapsis right now is non-existent. It's infinity. We're just going to do a kind of gravitational slingshot and be flung out into space, and it's going to increase our velocity around Kerbal a little bit and make it eccentric like that, but that's not our goal, obviously. So we need to decrease our apoapsis from infinity. So how are we going to do that? We're going to do a retrograde burn at the periapsis. So you can see the effect of that. It kind of curls it in, curls it in, curls it in, curls it in, and then it closes into a loop. So that's the point where you're actually in a elliptical orbit rather than I guess that would be a hyperbolic orbit around Minmus. So then we're just going to pull it in a little bit more, and more or less do the reverse of when we were circularizing around Kerbal. We're going to just keep pulling on it until the apoapsis and the periapsis kind of switch around on each other, and that's going to be roughly the point where it is circular again. So you can see they're starting to switch, whoops, and that's more or less circular, 293, 273. So we'll click that, make that a maneuver node, fast forward to that point. Gotta be kind of careful because we're going to be excuse me, we're going to be going faster and faster and faster, so it can kind of get away from you. Not particularly in that point, but if your orbit's a little bit more steep, it can get away from you. So you really do have to be careful. It's not like you're going from slow to fast, or from fast to slow, like you would be if you were rising. I guess it would be if you were on the other side of this. You're just going to be going slower and slower and slower and slower. On this side, you're going faster and faster and faster. That's something to look about. Just look out for. Let's see, this is so slow. But you can see that I have so much fuel that I haven't even had to detach the lander yet, and we're pretty much all the way to the moon. If I knew which way... Okay, there's Perry. There's Prograde. Where's the moon? There it is. Hello. And you can see the flashing down there. That is not, that's not, like, graphical problems. More or less, it's not graphical problems. That's actually little Easter eggs that are on the moon. So I highly suggest that you try to land there. The next episode's going to be a landing tutorial probably, so I'll show you how to land in the moon. We're going to stop after we actually circularize this. But I highly suggest trying to land on like the edge of that crater, or that actually might be a graphical artifact, but edge of that crater, there's another one there. There's some pretty cool stuff. There's stuff on like a lot of the planets too. That are just little Easter eggs and tidbits from the devs. So you can see that this estimated burn is 3 seconds. That's more or less instantaneous. So we're gonna want to use very low fuel. I'm gonna try to do it about 5 seconds from the node. Just to kind of guesstimate it as best possible. But the important thing is getting that. Whoa. The important thing is getting that delta V down to 0 and making sure that you stay on that blue as accurately as possible. It's going down, going down, going down, going down. And we're gonna stop it. That should be about right. Yep. Okay. Take that off, and now we are orbiting the moon. And you can see that, I mean, that's a decently heavy payload, and we got all the way from Kerbal orbit to moon orbit. Now, to generalize this a little bit better, because I've really only shown you how to get to the moon, say that you want to get to Duna. So right now, we are in a circular orbit around the Sun, Kerbal, and Duna is also in more or less a circular orbit around Duna. You can see it's not quite a circular orbit because it's a little bit elliptical, but the best way to do this is to just approximate that Duna's orbit is circular. So, how do we do a transfer orbit there? First thing you're going to want to do is get to a 100-kilometer parking orbit, or whatever parking orbit you want. Yet again, when you're there, you're going to want to do a burn at the right point around the planet Kerbal, so that your orbit kind of extends out in the correct direction to escape Kerbal in the correct direction. But the other thing that you're going to want to do is make sure that the position of Kerbal around the sun is correct relative to the position of Duna around the sun, because you want to make sure that when that transfer orbit slings out like that, you arrive at the same point in Duna's orbit that Duna is arriving at about the same time, so that you get captured by Duna's sphere of influence. The way to do that is to figure out what your ejection angle is. That's how far you are around the central body that you're trying to eject from, and find your phase angle versus Duna. Find the correct phase angle versus Duna relative to the body that you're both rotating, or you're both revolving around, which is the sun. That would be kind of hard to do on your own. I mean, you could do it. You can look at the equations on Wikipedia. But there's a site that is really helpful for doing that. It's called ksp.olex.biz. It sounds kind of like a sketchy site because it's .biz, and it's the only part that you really recognize is KSP, but it's completely legit. Thousands of people use this site to figure out KSP ejection angles and phase angles. It's going to flash it on the screen. It should be flashing on the screen. My future self is going to be flashing it on the screen. I trust him to use the video editing software wisely. So in that program, you're just going to pop in where you're going to, where you're coming from, how high you decided that you wanted to make your parking orbit, and it will tell you where in your parking orbit you need to start your prograde burn to eject, and where your home body has to be relative to your target body to actually get there. And then you can hold up a protractor to the screen. You can use MechJeb. You can there's actually a mod called the protractor mod. You can download and install that, and it will tell you what your phase angle and everything is. There's a lot of ways to do that. Simplest way is just grab a protractor. With maneuver nodes, the nice thing is that you can just fly by the seat of your pants, and you can take and make a new maneuver node, add a maneuver node like there. I want to make my maneuver node that, and then you can, whoops, I let that go away. You can grab that circle in the middle of the maneuver node and just slide it around and see what that's going to do to your orbit. Obviously this is doing nothing to my orbit, but you can see that it'll, if I was trying to intersect something that was up here, you could see that it would kind of tell me if I was going to intersect it. So you don't even have to be as exact. That was one of their points in adding the maneuver nodes, was that you don't have to be as exact anymore with your transfer angles and all that stuff. If you want to save on fuel and everything, and you want to be more precise, you can use ksp.olux.biz. But you don't have to anymore. What I used to do was actually put a piece of like really light, like not quite tracing paper up on the screen, and like measure and like match up the angles from the website to KSP, and then I started using protractor, but now MechJeb's pretty good at doing it. But that's how you get there. It gets harder. It gets much harder than going to the moon. If you can make it to the moon, you're off to a great start. Dune is decently easy to get to as far as planets go. Eve is one of the harder ones to land on. One of the hardest ones to land on I found was Elu, because it's not just far out, it's also in a very elliptical orbit, and it's in a tilted elliptical orbit. And like I told you, the whole ejection angle, phase angle, Hohmann transfer orbit thing assumes that you're going from a circular orbit to a circular orbit, both of inclination 0, i.e. that they're not tilted at all. So basically, if you're trying to get to Elu, you're trying to go from a circular non-tilted orbit to a non-circular tilted orbit, and the equations just don't work, because you're going to take a lot longer to get to, say, this point in the orbit than if it was actually a circular orbit. And you also have to do you have to waste, not waste, but you have to use a lot of fuel tilting your inclination that much, and it's not impossible. It's not even too hard, but it's way more difficult than, say, getting to the moon. But I suggest just, try what I did. Try to get to the moon. I think you'll be happy with how simple it is once you've mastered doing that orbit. Like I said, asparagus staging is kind of easy mode. You can see how much fuel I have left. I don't know. I can't really estimate it accurately, but I would say that I would have a decent chance at actually landing on the moon with this much fuel. I've got 703 units of fuel left, and a very small payload at the top here. I could probably land on the moon with this. I might blow up in the process, and I'm sure Jeb would still be smiling, but I probably wouldn't even need all this lander fuel and everything, except that this thing is like impossible to maneuver or anything, because it's so massive compared to the amount of torque that you get from that. But lots of fuel. Try to get to the moon. I hope that you guys found this helpful. Feel free to like the video if you liked it. Feel free to subscribe if you want to see my other videos. I've been doing a series on historic NASA missions, recreating them in KSP. I'm about to do the Gemini program. I've already done Freedom 1, Explorer 1, Friendships, or sorry, Freedom 7, Explorer 1, Friendship 7. So feel free to subscribe if you want to see those. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys learned something. Bye.